It was just past 2 o'clock on a Friday when I stepped into the bank with my son. The place smelled faintly of ink and polished wood, the quiet broken only by the shuffle of papers and the low murmur of tellers greeting customers. I clutched my purse tightly, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. My son walked beside me, his hand on my elbow as if guiding me, but the grip was firm, not gentle. "It'll only take a minute, Mom," he said, sliding a stack of documents across the manager's desk once we sat down. His smile was practiced, but his eyes told a different story. The manager glanced at me. "Mrs. Carter, these are transfer forms. They would move ownership of your house into joint names." I blinked, my throat dry. My son leaned in quickly. "It's just paperwork, Mom." "For convenience. You don't want to handle everything alone, do you?" His words sounded soft, but underneath I heard the command. "Sign. Don't argue." The pen felt heavy in my hand. I remembered another pen another day, decades ago, when my husband and I signed the deed together. His voice echoed in memory. "Always read twice before you sign. Don't let anyone rush you." My son nudged the papers closer. "Come on, we don't have all day." The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock, each second pressing against me. My palms were damp. I glanced at the manager, who was watching quietly, his brow slightly furrowed. Then, with a steadying breath, I slid my hand into my purse and pulled out a small folded note I had written the night before. My fingers trembled as I pressed it beneath the edge of the papers, pushing it toward him while my son adjusted his phone. The manager's eyes flicked down. His expression didn't change, but I saw the slightest movement, his hand covering the note, slipping it under the folder. My pulse quickened. My son tapped the table impatiently. "Just sign, Mom. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I looked at the line where my name was supposed to go, the blank space waiting, and then at the manager, who gave the smallest nod. That was the moment I realized I wasn't alone. So I ask you, what would you have done? Signed away everything to keep the peace? Or trusted a stranger to see the truth in your silence? That evening, after we left the bank, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the stack of papers my son had tried to make me sign. The lamplight glowed softly across the wooden surface, and the smell of chamomile tea filled the room, but my hands still shook. The line where my signature should have gone seemed to burn into my memory. This house wasn't just property. It was the place where I raised my child, where I planted roses by the porch, where my husband and I spent 3 decades of our lives together. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the old refrigerator, these sounds were part of me. To imagine them belonging to someone else, even my own son, felt like losing a piece of my own skin. Earlier in the week, he had visited with his wife, Sarah. She carried a casserole dish and a smile too wide to be natural. "Mom," she said, setting it down on the counter, "don't you think it would be easier if the house were in joint names? For safety? For family planning?" Her goal was clear. Security for herself and my son. Her stakes were high. If they controlled the house, they controlled me. But her flaws showed in the way she spoke, as if I had already agreed. My son just nodded along, not meeting my eyes. I laughed it off then, brushing the red flag aside. "That's not necessary," I said. "Your father always made sure I'd be taken care of." My own flaw revealed itself in that moment. I minimized, always smoothing conflict instead of facing it. That night, while washing dishes, I overheard their voices outside on the porch. Sarah's words carried clearly through the open window. "She'll give in eventually." "She always does." I froze, the dish towel dripping in my hands. The next morning, my granddaughter Lily bounded into the kitchen, her hair a messy halo, holding a drawing of our house. "This is Grandma's forever house," she said proudly, sticking it to the fridge with a magnet. Her innocent declaration hit me harder than Sarah's words. If even a child understood this house was mine, How could the adults twist it into something else? Later in the week, at the church community center, I folded bulletins beside my friend Elaine. She noticed the faint worry lines on my face. "Don't let them rush you," she whispered. Elaine had always sacrificed for her family, giving up her career to care for her mother. Her flaw was gossip. She couldn't keep a story to herself, but her loyalty was solid. If they try anything, people will know. By Thursday afternoon, I had already decided to stop pretending nothing was wrong. I found the original deed tucked in the drawer, the paper yellowed but strong, my name clear at the bottom. I placed it gently back, but not before tracing my husband's signature. His voice echoed in memory. "Always read twice. Never let anyone take it away." Still, I hesitated. My son was my only child. I wanted to believe he wouldn't betray me. But when I saw Sarah's car parked outside later that night, engine running though she never knocked on the door, the doubt grew heavier. By Friday morning, the bruise on my heart was deeper than any slap could have left. I brewed coffee, its bitter smell filling the kitchen, and told myself I would be ready for whatever they tried next. Saturday morning, I sat by the kitchen window, the soft light of dawn spilling across the table. I'd placed the deed back in the drawer, but my mind refused to rest. Every sound in the house seemed sharper. The squeak of the floorboard, the rustle of the mail slot, even the hum of the refrigerator. I began to feel like a stranger in my own home, watching for signs that someone else was trying to take it. My son arrived that afternoon, a folder tucked under his arm. "Mom," he began, with a tone too polished to be natural, "these papers are nothing complicated. Just signatures to make things easier. You'll still be here, of course." His words were smooth, but the subtext was sharp. "Sign it. Relinquish control." I kept my voice calm. "I don't see why it's necessary." He sighed, exchanging a glance with Sarah. She stepped forward, brushing an invisible crumb from the counter. "You forget things sometimes," she said lightly. "We just don't want you overwhelmed." Her tone carried another message entirely. "You're old. You can't handle it anymore." I pressed my lips together. The silence stretched. My flaw, avoiding conflict, itched at me, but I didn't argue. Not yet. Later that day, as I opened the drawer to check on the deed again, I heard a faint creak in the hallway. My heart jumped. Sarah was standing there, pretending to adjust a picture frame on the wall. Her hand lingered near the edge of the drawer. I closed it firmly. "Is something wrong?" I asked. She smiled too brightly. "Oh, just admiring the photo. You and your husband looked so young." Beneath the words lay another barb. "You're not young anymore. Time has passed you by." That evening, I washed dishes with the window cracked open. Voices drifted in from the porch. "She doesn't need to know everything," Sarah whispered. "If we keep pushing, she'll sign." "She always does." My son's reply was low but clear. "We just have to nudge her." The word nudge sent a chill down my spine. The plate slipped in my soapy hands, nearly shattering in the sink. I dried my hands quickly, the towel rough against my palms. When I stepped outside to fetch the mail, I noticed something tucked beneath the welcome mat, a folded receipt from the hardware store, dated 2 days earlier. My breath caught as I read the words, "Key duplication service." I slipped it into my pocket just as I heard footsteps on the gravel. Sarah approached, smiling as though nothing had happened. "Lovely evening, isn't it?" she said. Her eyes flicked toward my hand as if she knew what I had found. I forced a smile, though my chest tightened. Yes. Lovely inside. I unfolded the receipt again, staring at the evidence. They weren't just pushing me with words anymore. They were preparing to unlock my life without permission. By Sunday morning, I knew I couldn't rely on memory or emotion alone. If my son tried again at the bank, I would need something solid, proof that no one could deny. The first piece of that proof was already waiting in my drawer. I pulled out the deed, the paper worn soft at the edges, carrying the faint smell of ink and age. My husband's signature from 1988 stood beside mine, steady and bold. Underneath, the words, "Sole Ownership," underlined my name. Holding it in my hands steadied me. This wasn't just paper. It was my anchor. I decided to make a copy at the library. The machine hummed as I slid the deed under the glass, the warm light glowing against my hand. But when another patron stepped up behind me, I panicked. In my rush, I nearly walked away with only the copy, leaving the original behind. I caught myself at the last second, heart pounding, fingers trembling as I clutched the deed tight. The copy came out smudged, but at least the original was safe. That mistake reminded me how easily something so important could slip away. Later that afternoon, I walked across the street to Mrs. Campbell's house. Her living room smelled faintly of lavender, the soft tick of her mantel clock filling the silence. She hesitated when I asked, then pulled up her doorbell footage from earlier in the week. On the grainy screen, my porch appeared. I couldn't see faces clearly, but the voices were undeniable. My son's tone sharp. "Just sign it." "Don't drag this out," and Sarah's chiming in. "It's only paperwork for the family." Mrs. Campbell's lips pressed thin as she paused the video. "That doesn't sound like care to me," she said softly. Her hands shook as she saved the file onto a small USB and pressed it into my palm. I closed my fingers around it as if it were gold. On Monday, I returned to the bank. The scent of polished wood and printer ink met me as soon as I stepped inside. Mr. Hughes, the manager, led me into his office. His voice was calm but careful. "Your son was here last week," he explained, "asking about title transfers. I told him nothing could be done without you, of course, but I logged the visit." He slid a note across the desk. Written in his precise hand were the words, "Visit logged, Tuesday, 11 a.m. I tucked the slip into my purse, my pulse quickening. That small piece of paper was another brick in the wall I was building. Back at home, I spread everything across the dining table. The deed, the smudged copy, the USB, the banker's note. For the first time, I saw the full picture taking shape. As I stared at it all, my son's words echoed again. "It's just paperwork, Mom." For convenience, I heard the smooth tone, but now I understood the steel underneath. The phone rang. His number glowed on the screen. "Mom," he began quickly, "Sarah says you're making this bigger than it is." "No one's trying to take anything. You're being paranoid." The words cut, sharp, classic gaslighting. I let the silence stretch, long enough for him to feel it. Then I said quietly, "I have proof." This time, the silence belonged to him. When I hung up, my hands no longer shook. Fear hadn't left me, but something stronger had taken its place. Proof wasn't just defense, it was power. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't fighting alone. Tuesday afternoon, the house was quiet except for the slow tick of the clock in the hallway. Sunlight filtered in through the curtains, catching the dust in the air. I sat at the kitchen table. The evidence spread before me. The deed, the banker's note, the USB drive. Each piece felt heavy with meaning. For most of my life, silence had been my flaw. I kept the peace by smoothing over arguments, by pretending small wounds didn't sting. That silence had invited people to push, to take, to believe I would never fight back. But as I looked at the papers in front of me, I realized silence could also be armor. If I didn't argue, if I didn't push back right away, they would keep talking. And in their talking, they would reveal themselves. Silence could be a disguise. Silence could be strategy. That evening, my son called again. His voice carried the same false calm as always. "Mom, I just want to help. If everything is in my name, I can protect you from scams, from mistakes. You wouldn't have to worry anymore." The words sounded kind, but underneath was the same demand. Give me control. I let a pause stretch long enough to make him uneasy. Then I answered simply, "I understand. Inside, I wasn't agreeing. I was preparing. After we hung up, I pulled a small notepad from my drawer. My handwriting trembled at first, but then steadied as I wrote, "Please read this note silently. My son is trying to force me to sign away my home. I do not consent." I folded the slip and tucked it into my purse, ready for the next visit to the bank. Steam curled from my teacup as I whispered to myself, "Quiet doesn't mean powerless. Quiet means prepared." A memory rose up, unbidden, last Thanksgiving when the house had been filled with laughter. My son carved the turkey while Sarah handed me the best piece, smiling sweetly. I had believed then that family was safety. Now that memory burned with irony. The warmth of that dinner stood in stark contrast to the cold maneuvering of today. I set the cup down and pressed my palm against the wood of the table. My husband's voice echoed again. "Always read twice before you sign." Don't let anyone rush you this time. I wasn't going to be rushed. I wasn't going to be silenced into surrender. My flaw, silence, was no longer a weakness. It was my disguise, my shield, and soon it would be my weapon. By Wednesday, the story was no longer just between me, my son, and Sarah. Whispers had started in the community, curling through the church halls and over back fences. Elaine cornered me after service, her voice low but urgent. "People are saying your son wants the house in his name." Is it true? Her eyes flickered with both worry and curiosity. Elaine meant well, but her flaw, her love of gossip, had already turned my private struggle into community talk. Part of me felt exposed, but another part saw its usefulness. If people knew, then eyes were watching, and eyes could protect. That afternoon, I visited Mr. Hughes at the bank again. His office smelled of fresh ink and faint cologne, the blind, slanting sunlight across the desk. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter, I need you to see this." He handed me a photocopy of a document someone had tried to file, a quitclaim deed, with my name forged at the bottom. The signature was shaky, nothing like mine. The sight made my stomach turn. My son hadn't just pressured me with words. He had tried to erase me with paper. Mr. Hughes shook his head. "It's invalid, of course." Rejected immediately, but the attempt is logged. His tone was careful, but the weight of his words pressed heavy in the room. Walking home, I tucked the photocopy deep into my purse. The street smelled of cut grass, the late afternoon air sharp against my face. My granddaughter Lily ran to meet me at the gate, her drawing pad clutched tight. She held up a picture she had scribbled in bright crayons, a house with roses in front. "Grandma's forever house," she said proudly. Her innocence was a balm and a knife, reminding me of both what I was fighting for and what was at risk. That evening, my son showed up with flowers. He placed them on the counter, his eyes soft, his tone rehearsed. "Mom, Sarah and we just want to make sure you're safe. We were wrong to push. Let's start fresh for a moment." I almost let myself believe him. The smell of lilies filled the room, and his hand rested gently over mine. But then, through the window, I saw Sarah's car parked down the street. She wasn't coming in. She was watching, waiting. My chest tightened. This wasn't reconciliation. It was surveillance, a false peace staged to lull me. 2 days later, Elaine invited me over for coffee. The rich aroma filled her kitchen as she leaned in close. "You should talk to Pastor Jim," she whispered. "If Sarah and your son are forging papers, you need more than neighbors on your side." Her advice carried truth, though her tone carried judgment too, an unspoken question of why I hadn't acted sooner. That night, I sat in my darkened living room, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator. A faint rattle echoed from the front door. My heart leapt, the metallic jingle of keys in the lock. I was sure someone was trying to come in. I tiptoed closer, my pulse pounding, breath caught. Then I saw it. The wind had blown the spare set of keys hanging by the door, making them clink against the wood. My knees gave way with relief, but dread followed quickly. If the sound of keys could frighten me this much, what would happen the day someone really tried to use them? Later that same week, I woke to a soft knocking at the door. My chest tightened, every sound in the house amplifying in the dark. I pulled the curtain back with shaking fingers. No one was there. Only a folded flyer had been slipped under the crack, the paper damp with dew. I bent to pick it up, heart racing. If someone wanted me to feel watched, the message had landed. By Friday, the whispers had grown louder. Mrs. Campbell admitted she overheard Sarah at the grocery store bragging to a friend. "It's only a matter of time before the house is ours," Sarah had said, her tone smug. But when her friend asked, "Don't you feel guilty?" Sarah faltered for a moment, her face stiff. Then she forced a laugh. "She doesn't deserve it anymore." That slip, the crack in her mask, was small, but it was there. I walked home that evening, the twilight air smelling of wood smoke. Inside, I laid the forged deed copy beside the real one, the USB and the bank manager's note. The web had widened. Neighbors whispered, church members judged, even Sarah's own words betrayed her. As I slid the folder shut, a single sheet slipped out and fluttered to the floor. My breath caught. It wasn't my copy. It was a forged version, my name scratched in shaky ink. I hadn't seen it before. Someone had slipped it in. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, the smell of toner still fresh. Proof wasn't just in whispers anymore. It was staring me in the face. I wasn't just gathering proof anymore. I was watching the walls close in around them. Saturday morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a steady navy coat and my husband's old watch, as if armor could be stitched from memory. The air outside was sharp with autumn, carrying the scent of dry leaves as I walked to the bank. My purse felt heavier than usual. The deed, the banker's note, the USB, and the folded slip I had written waiting quietly inside. The lobby was hushed when I arrived. The click of heels on the tiled floor, the rustle of deposit slips. My son was already there, standing tall, folder in hand. Sarah hovered behind him, her eyes darting around the room. "Mom," he said smoothly, "this is for the best. Just sign today and everything will be easier." His tone was light, but there was steel beneath it. He placed the papers on the desk with a practiced flourish. The manager, Mr. Hughes, looked at me. His expression was calm, but his eyes were searching. I sat slowly, smoothing my skirt. The pen slid across the desk toward me. My son's hand pressed the edge of the paper closer. "Right here, Mom." "Don't make this difficult." The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. My fingers trembled as I lifted the pen. Sarah's whisper carried from behind him. "She's always so slow." "Just guide her hand if you need to." My chest tightened. The pen slipped from my hand, clattering onto the desk with a sharp clink. The sound cut through the hush of the bank, louder than any word I could have spoken. Then I let my hand dip beneath the papers, sliding the folded slip of paper toward the manager. My son didn't notice. He was too focused on me. Mr. Hughes lifted the note discreetly, unfolding it beneath the desk. His brow furrowed, then he cleared his throat. "I think we need to pause here," he said, his voice steady. My son stiffened. "Why?" "She's ready to sign." The manager stood, holding up the slip. "This note says otherwise. It says you're trying to force her into signing away her property without consent." Gasps rippled through the room. A teller froze mid-step. Even Sarah flinched. My son's face went pale. "That's not true." "She's confused. She doesn't understand what she's signing." I spoke, my voice trembling but clear. "I understand perfectly." "And I do not consent." Mr. Hughes set the papers aside firmly. "Without her consent, nothing will move forward." He gestured to the folder. "And I should add, we already logged your previous inquiry. There's a record of your attempt." My son's composure cracked. "I just wanted to protect the family," he blurted, his voice breaking. His words echoed in the room, sounding less like care and more like desperation. Mr. Hughes leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. Protecting family doesn't mean stealing from it. The words landed heavy in the room, a judgment no one could ignore. Sarah stepped forward, her face tight. We should have stopped. I should have stopped him. Her voice faltered, and for the first time, she looked directly at me. Her hand trembled as she twisted the wedding ring on her finger, sliding it halfway off before pressing it back down. The gesture was small, but it spoke volumes. The crack in her certainty, the fracture running through our family. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with judgment from every corner of the bank. I reached into my purse and pulled out the original deed. I laid it flat on the desk, my husband's signature bold and unshakable. "This house is mine," I said. "It has always been mine." Sarah looked down, shame flickering across her face. My son's shoulders sagged, the confidence drained from him. For once, he had no words. The room held still, the smell of ink and coffee lingering as everyone absorbed the moment. Then Mr. Hughes spoke again, his voice firm. "This matter is settled. She is the sole owner. Any further attempts will be treated as fraud." I gathered the deed, sliding it back into my purse. My hands no longer shook. I stood, straightening my coat, and for the first time in weeks, I felt taller. As I walked out of the bank, the autumn air wrapped around me like a victory I hadn't expected to taste. The following Monday, I returned to the county clerk's office, escorted by Mr. Hughes. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the room filled with the faint smell of ink and old files. My hands rested firmly on the counter as the clerk stamped the paperwork. This time, the decision was mine, not forced upon me. We set up a living trust in my name. My house would remain mine for as long as I lived and then pass directly to Lily. The process was careful, each page signed slowly, each line read twice. My pen no longer trembled. It moved with steady purpose. When the last stamp echoed on the page, "Mr." Hughes nodded. "This secures everything. No one can touch it." Now relief washed through me like a tide. News spread quickly. By midweek, neighbors paused during their walks, their voices softer now. Some looked embarrassed, ashamed for having whispered. Others pressed my hand, murmuring, "Good for you." Elaine came by with a pie, her eyes glinting with pride. "I might talk too much," she admitted, "but sometimes the whole town knowing is exactly what keeps the truth alive." Her flaw had become her strength. Mrs. Campbell invited me for tea, her lavender-scented house as comforting as ever. She slid the USB back across the table. "You won't need this anymore," she said with a small smile, "but I'll always keep a copy just in case." Her quiet loyalty had been a shield I hadn't known I needed. At church the following Sunday, Pastor Jim's sermon shifted. "We are called to honor the dignity of those who came before us," he said, his gaze sweeping across the pews. I felt the congregation glance toward me, but this time there was no pity, only respect. Meanwhile, the legal system moved forward. The forged deed was filed as evidence, recorded permanently as invalid. My son wasn't arrested, but his reputation cracked under the weight of exposure. At the grocery store, I overheard whispers. He tried to trick his own mother. The judgment of the community would follow him long after. At home, I took the spare keys Sarah had duplicated and placed them in a small box. I handed it to my lawyer. "Destroy them," I said firmly. It was more than a legal act. It was symbolic. She had tried to take my home through those keys, and now I was reclaiming them as mine. One evening, my son came by alone. He didn't bring flowers this time. His shoulders sagged, his face pale. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "I didn't want to see it, but I can't deny it anymore." He looked down at Lily, who had clung to his sleeve. "She deserves better than what we showed her." I studied him for a long moment before answering. "You have to decide what kind of man you want to be." "Not for me." for her. That night, I tucked Lily's crayon drawing into the trust folder. A crooked little house with bright roses and the words, "Grandma's House," scrawled across the roof. It was more than paperwork now, it was a promise. As autumn settled over the neighborhood, the house felt quiet again, but the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of fear or of avoidance. It was the silence of safety, the kind that let me sleep through the night without checking the locks twice. The first Sunday of November was calm, the kind of morning when the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and the porch boards held the last warmth of yesterday's sun. I sat outside with a cup of tea, the trust papers and the house keys resting on the table beside me. The fight was over, but its shadow still lingered. Trust, once broken, never returns whole. There was grief in that. Grief for the son I thought I could always lean on. Grief for the ease of family dinners before suspicion settled between us. Yet alongside the grief came something else. Strength. I had stood my ground. I had not surrendered. Lily skipped across the lawn, her laughter bright against the quiet street. She climbed onto my lap, her little arms wrapping around my waist. "Grandma, you kept the house safe for us," she said, her voice innocent yet steady. I pressed a kiss to the top of her head, my throat tightening. She didn't know the weight of what had almost been lost, but she understood the outcome. The house, with its creaking floors and rose-lined porch, would still be ours. I thought again of my husband, the day he handed me the keys decades ago. "Always read twice before you sign," he had told me. "Never let anyone take this from you." His words had echoed through every step of this struggle. Now, sitting with Lily in my lap, I heard them differently, not as a warning, but as a legacy. Neighbors passed on the sidewalk offering small waves, their eyes softer than before. Some carried judgment still, but most carried respect. The community had seen the truth, and that mattered. As the tea cooled in my cup, I let the silence stretch. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of surrender, but the silence of reflection. And I ask you, what would you have done in my place? Signed away everything to keep the peace? Or stood your ground, even if it meant breaking family ties? The house creaked behind me, the roses stirred in the breeze, and I knew life would remain imperfect, uncertain. But the keys on the table gleamed in the morning light, a quiet promise that this home and the dignity bound to it would endure.